Thank you, Sue, and thank you, everybody. You're very kind to me, and it's great to be here. Great to have the opportunity of being here this evening with you. I've been praying for a long time that the Lord will open up the little opportunities that I have in media, so to open a floodgate so lots and lots of people have opportunities in media. The most important jobs in television actually are not in front of cameras, they are behind cameras every time. And so my prayer is that the little bit of ground that I have will create the opportunity for many people in front and even more people behind the cameras and in radio and all sorts of things as the years go by. So please do pray for me in that and for others who are working with me. If you would like to know more about some of the things I talked about earlier, some of the things that we're doing at Christmas. If you went along to Oasis, the organisation I work for has a little stand here. And if you went along to the Oasis stand and you left your name and address, then we could keep you in touch with some of the very exciting developments I think that may happen later in this year, if the Lord is with us. Great. About a year ago, just under a year ago, I made another Songs of Praise program, and some of it was made in this country. In fact, most of it was made in this country, and a little bit was made in India and on an aeroplane. And I was planning to travel to India anyway, because the Oasis Trust works in India. So I was flying out to Bombay to see some of my friends that are working there. And BBC knew which day I was going out on, so they fixed it up with British Airways that we could all go on the same plane. We could kill two birds with one stone. And the pilot of this aeroplane was a Christian, so we interviewed him on the way out, and we did some stuff in India and all the rest of it. So BBC were happy, and I got, and Oasis were happy. So off we all went on this aeroplane together. It was a really interesting experience, and it was interesting for this reason. We arrived at Heathrow. It was a Sunday night. Those long-haul flights often happen overnight. And so we arrived there Sunday evening, and we all got on board this aeroplane. Now, we were going to film in the cockpit, with the pilot and his co-pilot, which was brilliant. I was not looking forward to this aeroplane flight, just sitting there like on a bus for hour after hour. So it was brilliant. I'd never been up the front on an aeroplane before. And this was a jumbo jet, those big ones. And so I got to go up front, and I got introduced to the pilot, and it was a stunning aeroplane. It really was good. Everything smelt good and looked good. It was great. And I sat up the front before we took off. We were still there, right, with the people getting on board. And I said to the pilot, this aeroplane looks new. And he said, well, actually, it is new. He said, it's never flown before. He said, to tell you the truth, British Airways bought it Friday tea time. He said, we put all these stickers on yesterday, and we're going to fly it now. I said, oh, that's exciting. And then he said, yeah, and more than that, he was really enthusiastic. I was losing my enthusiasm fast. He said, more than that, he said, the best thing about this is, he said, I have never, ever flown a plane like it. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it looks like a jumbo jet. On the outside, he said, it is the shell of a jumbo jet. It's a 747. He said, it is one. But he said, this is a jumbo jet like British Airways have never, ever had. I said, why? He said, because it's totally flown by computer. He said, really? I do nothing except start it. And he said, then we just go from there. And I said, well, surely you've got to do something. He said, well, in emergency, I've trained. He said, I said, have you been up in one at all with someone else? He said, no one's ever flown one of these. He said, but I have had to go on a simulator. That's like a PC, isn't it? I mean, I've played flying aeroplanes on PCs. I play them in arcades, so I wasn't at all impressed by that. So anyway, we set out. And he said, basically, my job is to taxi it off that little, where the people get on and off that little walkway. I taxi it to the front of the beginning of the runway. And he did, First of all, we were heaved off it, and then he did all the stuff. And we got to the end of the runway, and it was night, and we looked down the runway, and all these lights were there, like you see on the films. All these lights were there. We couldn't see a thing except these lights. And he said, well, here it goes. Let's see if it works. And he had a great sense of humour, actually. And he said, let's go. Let's see if it works. And he said, I'm a Christian. I'm not scared of death. And glad he didn't announce that to the passengers. But he said, this aeroplane weighs 400 tons with all the fuel on board. 400 tons. By the time we take off, if we take off, we will be doing 230 miles an hour. 400 tons at 230 miles an hour. I was thinking, not a nice sight if it doesn't work. He said, and my last thing I have to do before we reach India is start the thing. And he got this mouse, like you do, and there was a little icon, right? And it said, go, and he went... double-clicked, Windows 95, all of that kind of stuff. Start me up, and wow, we were down this runway. It was quite incredible. Honestly, it didn't say go, but he did click. He did double-click on something, and the plane just shot down this runway into the air. It was absolutely staggering. Then we had a little meal, and we had a little chat, and all sorts of things. And the plane explained itself. I said, how come you managed to get paid so much for doing so little, and I get paid nothing for doing so much? And he said, well, it's the training. And he said, if it goes wrong, then I might have to do something. Well, the thing went on, and we eventually did this interview, but we did it as the sun rose above the clouds. It was incredible. But as the sun was coming up, and BBC were all up there, and we're beginning to film this interview, on the horizon, as far away as we could see, there was this little glint, like a star, but it was morning time. And I said, what's that? And all night long, we'd been joking about the plane because it made manoeuvres. He said things like, well, about now, we should be turning left. I don't know if we will anymore, but when I used to drive, we did, And we suddenly lurched. It was incredible how the whole thing worked. And then what happened was this glint came up. And I said, what's that? And he looked at it. He said, that is the Air France jumbo jet from Bombay to Paris. He said, that is doing about 600 miles an hour, and it's coming at us. We are doing about 600 miles an hour, and we are going at it. Normally, when I'm driving, we fly just about 1,000 feet over the top of it. Now, 1,000 feet isn't a lot when you're in a thing that big and you're that far up in the air and you're going that fast. So, at a closing speed of 1,200 miles an hour, it was the most incredible experience. It was like on Star Trek when they go into warp speed. This plane, this tiny dot, turned into this ginormous jumbo jet, which just came hammering straight at us and slipped underneath us. It was quite incredible. And they pass underneath each other, always so as not to shock the passengers. I nearly said the patients. I get it. Because there's nothing more off-putting than sitting in your seat and a socking great jumbo jet flies past your wing going the other way. Especially if it's got the person you're going to see on it. So they pass underneath. And I've had lots of time to think about that experience, this kind of near miss. It was quite incredible. And I believe this. I believe that in the church today, there are some incredible things going on. And I believe that in society, there are some incredible things going on. And I hear lots of people talking about the coming revival. I hear lots of people talking about what's going to happen. But I do have a question mark in my mind. I hope it's not because I'm cynical, but I do have a question mark. And I wonder if we're heading for a collision. The things that God is doing in the church are going to collide with the things that God is doing out there in society. And we're going to see God moving and the church being a voice the voice of the Lord in our society, and people coming to know him, and families being healed, and society being mended. I wonder if we're going to see some of that, or I wonder if what we're going to see is just a very near miss. God doing some great things in the church, which somehow are unconnected to the things that God is doing in society. The two never seem to marry up and collide. That's what we need. That's what I'm praying for. That's what we must work for. I was with some friends of mine just yesterday, and we were talking, some friends in television, and they were saying to me, what can we do to create a sense of a national thankfulness to God for life? None of these people are Christians, as you and I would understand it. But they're asking me this question, what can we do? What can we do? People are searching. People want to say thank you. People want to say thank you to God for life. People who are lost want to find hope. That's what we've just been singing about together. So many questions, so much happening in the church. But is it just going to be a near miss and gone? This evening's theme is Faith Lifts. And tomorrow you're going to be talking about how faith endures in your main seminars, talking about faith enduring. And so I thought that what it would be good to do is look at the story of a man in the Bible whose faith did endure, because I believe this, that if we are going to see what God is going to do, wants to do in this land happen, several things have to happen. But one of the most important, I believe, is simply this, that we have to endure. We have to persevere. We have to learn to slog. We have to learn to keep going. We have to learn to never give up. My friend Gerald here, last year at Spring Harvest, I was here in one of the evening venues, and Gerald was on the other end of a telephone. Do you remember us ringing you up? Do you remember? Yeah, do you remember that? We rang Gerald up. He was somewhere else, and he was on a mobile phone. And Gerald was asked the question, what's success all about? And Gerald said this, I've never forgotten this. He said, success is the ability to survive failure. Success is the ability to survive failure, to keep on keeping on, to keep on working at it, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, knowing what we want to see, knowing what we want God to do, holding that vision, facing setbacks, facing failure, facing things that fall apart that we want to happen, but keeping on, keeping on, keeping on. And I'd like us to read from Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, which is the beginning of the story of Abraham, as he's called here, Abraham, as he becomes a little bit later on, as he gets some letters added to his name. Here we go. Genesis verse 12, verse 1. The Lord said to Abraham, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abraham left, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. And then I'd like us to look down at verse 10. In the next few verses, Abraham sets out, he enters this land of Canaan, God's promised land. But then in verse 10 it says this, now there was a severe famine in the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. Abraham is a man to whom we all owe ever such a lot. Without Abraham, there would be no spring harvest. Without Abraham, there would be no spring harvest because there would have been no Jesus. Without Jesus, there would have been no Christian faith. Without Jesus, there would be no hope to sing about. Without Jesus, there would be no future. Without Jesus, there would be no church. Nothing. Jesus was born of the Jews. Jesus was a Jew. And Abraham was the founder of the Jewish nation. God wanted an instrument, a tool to work with. He wanted a people who would serve him, a people who would declare who he was, a people who would show who he was, a people from whom his son Jesus would eventually come. And in order to begin this whole process, he speaks to an old man called Abraham, a 75-year-old. And he says, Abraham, I want you to leave your country, leave your people. You see it there in verse 1 of chapter 12. Leave your country, leave your people, leave your father's household, and go. Leave everything, leave your land, leave everything, leave your heritage, leave your security, and head off to the land, and this is the twist, I will show you. Not that I have shown you, the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great. And then in verse 4 it says, so Abraham left and did what the Lord told him, and Lot went with him. Abraham sets out in obedience to God. And because this man, these thousands of years ago, obeyed God's, we are sat here today. One man in God's purposes has such incredible influence. In God's purposes, walking with God, your life can have absolutely incredible impact. Your life can have incredible impact if you will take seriously the fact that God can take hold of an individual and do through them things that will influence nations. Nations. But this is what happens. Abraham sets out, and in verse 4 it says rather kind of boldly and rather kind of in a jolly fashion, so Abraham left and he did what the Lord told him. Great. But there were some problems that I'd like to talk about if we're going to be real. You know, one of the things that worries me about me is this. It's that because I sometimes, I just nipped to the loo on the way in because, I nipped into this loo and over there at the back, and I was washing my hands and I took this towel and I threw it in the bin, and in the bin there was my picture staring out at me. You know? It's true. I'm saying true. So I picked it up, I looked at it, and it said, it was about Alpha Magazine, and it said something about, you know, each month in Alpha Magazine, leading Christians like Steve Chalke. Right. I looked in the Spring Harvest program, and it said, what do George Carey, John Wimber, somebody else, and Steve Chalke, I can't remember, Derek Tibble, and Steve Chalke have in common? And my answer is they're all plonkers. You know, they're kind of... That's what they got in common. They're all people struggling along. But the problem is that we have this hype that exists within the church that takes people, just like the hype that exists out of the church, we copy the whole thing. And we turn people into what they're not. We turn people into what they're not. I have been a Christian for 26 years, since I was 14. I'm 40 now, so just so you don't have to take a long time working out the maths. Right? And for the whole of those 26 years, since the age of 14, my one desire has been to serve Jesus. And the one thing I seem to have stumbled over more than anything else and mucked up and got my motives mixed up about is just that. The one central goal that I hold is the one that I find so difficult to fulfill. I struggle and I stumble along. And what we're looking at here, when it says, and Abraham left and did what the Lord commanded him, it's not a superhero who writes for Alpha Magazine every month and doesn't have any problems. We're looking at, and Alpha Magazine's a great magazine, I might say, I better add. Let me put that on tape now. It is a great magazine. But, do you see, we're talking about a real man with real struggles and real pressures and real problems. That's who we're talking about. And I'd like to just list some of Abraham's problems for you, just so that you know what they were. The first one, well, we've already mentioned it. He didn't have a map. It's a big problem. I've just come from London to Skegness. Coming from London to Skegness without a map is difficult, let me tell you. It's very difficult because you think you remember where you should go, but then you realise you don't. Abraham, if you read it back into chapter 11, at the end of chapter 11, he was called from Ur, and he was called to go to Canaan, which was a lot further than London to Skegness. In fact, I've got a very new translation edition of the Bible that was given to me by some of my charismatic friends. And so I looked up in the maps at the back, I tried to look up how far it is from Ur to Canaan in the maps. But as I looked in the back of this new Bible, all it's got is a street map of Toronto. Do you know? So, it's kind of very handy A to Z if I ever go, you know, but... So we just have to believe that it was a long way. Abraham did not have a map. That's the point. He was sent out on this journey and he didn't have a map. God didn't say, now leave all your security, but here is Treasure Islands. Here's the map and here's the way. Here's where you are. Here's where you want to get to. And here's the dotted line to follow. Abraham left without a map. In other words, he was asked to throw away his security. He was asked to throw away everything he'd worked for. He was asked to step out into absolutely nothing just on God's say-so. He had no map, but he was called to go. But he had other problems. He was 75 when he left. 75 is 10 years over the retirement age. It's 10 years into claiming your pension. It's 10 years into having your bus pass. It's 10 years into perhaps justifiably sitting there in your rocking chair on your veranda and surveying what you've built up through the years. It's 10 years into all of that. And God says to this 75-year-old man, I mean, who else would do this? Do you know? I mean, I am a Baptist minister. I've been taught to be pastoral. We have elderly people in our churches. Do you know, like I've worked for a church, we had lots of elderly people in. You know, if I wanted them just to go to the old folks meeting, I'd go and pick them up. And God says this to an old man of 75, he says, out of that chair, on your feet, you are going on a trek, and who knows where it's going to lead you to. There's no map, but you have to go. And Abraham decides to step out and go. God promises him things. He promises to make him a great nation. Now, Abraham and his wife, Sarah, they have no children. And they're very old. He is 75. She is nearly as old. You don't often become parents at that age. That's just for the folks in the chalet. That's what I'm saying. But, hello, everybody. That's it. Right. You don't often become parents at that age. And yet, Abraham is asked to believe against all common sense that this is the thing to do. And then he sets out, and actually, I don't know if you know this, God promises Abraham a land to live in, and he promises him a family, a nation to fill that land. He's got no map to find the land, and no kind of way of making the other bit happen either. He's got no way of getting to the land, and he's got no way of having a son. It's just past that for him. And for the next 25 years, that remains the case. And Abraham and Sarah's son, Isaac, is born, you'll read, if you read through the rest of the book of Genesis, 25 years later. So for 25 years, this old man sets out, hoping against hope, believing against all of the material evidence that God is with him, that God's going to bless him, and all he's got to do is keep on going. And then there's this last one, verse 10. Abraham finally gets to Canaan, and it says this. Now there was a severe famine in the land, and Abraham had to go down to Egypt to live there because the famine was so severe. Can you believe it? God gets a 75-year-old man out of his rocking chair. He takes him away from his bus pass. He sends him on a journey without a map. And when the old guy finally gets there, there's a massive famine. And he has to go somewhere else. Would you do that? Would you do that to somebody who's been so faithful and then you slap a famine on them? But that is what it's like. That's what it's like. You see, the more we read Scripture, the more we read the Old and the New Testament, the more we will discover this, that serving Christ is difficult. You get down in despair. You go through the valley of the shadow of the deepest despair, which is what Psalm 23 literally means. You go through the valley of the shadow of death. You feel like giving up. You want to walk away from the thing. Suffering seems to be all around you, and it seems to be in you. Hardship seems to be all around you, and the easiest thing to do is to give up. We have come to believe, this is my considered opinion, you see, each generation's theology is shaped by two things. One's the Bible, by God and what he says, and the other is by the culture in which they live. That's obviously true. But the problem is, if our theology becomes too shaped by our culture, there is a sense in which it should be shaped by our culture because we're always responding to our culture. But if it becomes too earthed in a culture and we buy too much into the philosophies that surround us, what happens is we end up drifting from what the Bible says without recognizing it. I believe this. Last night you were talking about faith equipping and the Holy Spirit. I believe this, that so often our idea of the Holy Spirit has more to do with the culture around us than with what the Bible has to say. In fact, I believe that many of us end up believing in a kind of cross between the Holy Spirit and the Hollywood spirit. You know what I mean by the Hollywood spirit? I mean Indiana Jones. I mean James Bond. I mean Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean all these guys and girls who live in a world where everything turns out right. I mean the hype. I mean the people who are your heroes. I mean those heroes that we have both inside and out the church who we believe are somehow different to us. They're made of different stuff and they live on a different planet. James Bond strolls through life and nothing ever has any consequences. Have you noticed that? Whatever he does, it's okay 5 minutes later. Everything's okay. He strolls into a room and he strips naked with a girl and they lay on a bed which is perfectly made. Incredible. And she never has a headache and it never goes wrong and there's no, it's just amazing. And there's no venereal disease and there's no condoms and there's no AIDS and there's no, none of that. He lives in a world where he floats. He lives in a world where he can be bombed, blown up. He lives in a world where he can be stabbed and hit and punched and closhed over the head with great iron rods, but he gets up. Hey, James Bond's here, and he's away again. And we have come to believe in this because all our magazines sell us that image, don't they? They sell us the image of the model who looks absolutely stunning because she was under more lights than you could endure, because her makeup was that thick, and because they took 450 pictures to get one. You know that. They know that. But we all fall for the lie that there's a kind of person out there who really doesn't struggle with life. I don't know people who aren't struggling with life. I don't know anyone who's not struggling with life. I have, had the opportunity to get to know many people in media, in television, the people that I read about in the papers and talk to later in the day, and they're struggling. They are struggling with life. They sit down and they want to talk. They're struggling with life. Life is a struggle for everyone. But some of us, are in search of this experience where if the right person prays over us in the right way, with the right arm movement, what will happen is suddenly it will all come right. And from there on in, we stride through life filled with God's Spirit and undaunted. I have been a Christian for 26 years. I have prayed and prayed and prayed for the Lord to fill me with his Spirit and use me. And I believe he has. But I've struggled through life as well with my mixed up, muddled up motives. So often thinking, if only I'd not said that, if only I'd not done that, if only Cornelia, that's the name of my wife, if only I'd not said that to her. So often I have to phone her up and say, I'm really sorry. I am really sorry that you're married to such a pig. I stumble through life just like you do. God's Spirit comes to fill ordinary people. God's Spirit comes to fill us, and he does use us, each one of us. But the reality of that is this, that we still struggle on with life. Filled with God's Spirit, equipped, but still struggling on with life, and called to take up a cross, not a cushion. Take up your cushion. That's the spirit of Hollywood. Take up your cushion and relax. Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me. Jesus, being filled with God's Spirit, was nailed to a cross. Jesus, being filled with God's Spirit, bowed down in Gethsemane and called out, Father, Father, take this cup from me. I cannot endure this pain. And his tears were like droplets of blood, because he was so stressed and so pressured and so much in agony and anguish. Jesus was so near the edge. Please, Father, take this from me. No, but I will cling to your will, whatever it costs me. Jesus went to the tomb of his friend and he cried. Jesus was angry. Jesus was frustrated. Jesus was filled with God's Spirit. To be filled with God's Spirit does not somehow lift me out of real life. Does not mean I'm sat up there and I won't endure hardship. I won't go through pain. I won't go through trouble. I won't want to give up. It means that God will be there with me, even though you walk through the deepest valley of despair. I will be with you. So hang on. That's what it's all about. I'd like you, if you could, to do a bit of homework. Take an A4 sheet of paper, draw a line down the middle, and on one side, make a list of all the people in the Bible, men and women, Old and New Testament, who were filled with God's Spirit and therefore had a wonderful life where nothing ever went wrong, feeling great every day, praying every morning and basking in the light of the relationship they had with God every day. And then on the other side, draw up a list of people who, being filled with God's Spirit, struggled. Who, being filled with God's Spirit, went through hard times, who were imprisoned and beaten, who, being filled with God's Spirit, suffered, who, being filled with God's Spirit, reached the deepest despair, who, being filled with God's Spirit, were depressed or pressured or stressed or in anguish or cried, but kept on going. Paul says, laying behind everything that's behind me, I run the race, I will keep running. And he wasn't a 100-meter sprinter. He was a marathon runner. Not here for the short dash, but here for the long marathon. Keeping on, keeping on, keeping on. Paul says, oh, wretched man that I am, the very things I want to do, I can't do. And everything I want to do, I just can't do it. But the things I don't want to do, they become so much part of me. Was this before he was converted that he said that? Was it before he was filled with God's Spirit that he said that? It was afterwards. This is the experience of a Spirit-filled Christian. So if anyone comes selling you something else, chuck it out as trash. Because it's not true, it's not honest, it's not biblical, and it's not godly. This is the reality of living with Christ. Yeah, there is great joy in serving Christ. There is great joy. I would do nothing else. Nothing else. But what they didn't tell me in Sunday school was that so much of the joy is there to cope with the suffering. So much of the peace that Jesus came to give us is there to cope with the pain of living for Christ. And that's everybody's experience. That's every disciple's experience. There are struggles that are external. And Abraham has all of these external struggles in setting out to follow God and do his will. He has no map. He's too old. He's getting older. He can't find the land. And when he does find the land's in famine and he has to go somewhere else. External pressures. But there are internal pressures as well. If you read Abraham's story, and I wish we could just read through the next few chapters of Genesis, you'll see that this old 75-year-old that God had chosen was far from perfect. He was far from, in many ways, what you would consider to be the ideal candidate. In fact, he ends up in loads of trouble down in Egypt, and he lies to get himself out of it. And he lies more than once. He keeps on making the same mistakes. He is someone who not only struggles with his external environment, the fact he hasn't got a map and his wife's too old to bear children, he suffers with what's internal, his own attitudes, who he is and who he's not. I have heard over the years, so many times, people say, unless you read scripture every day and pray solidly, God will not use you. I want you to know two things. One is, I've never read anything like that in the Bible. Secondly is, if God has used me in any way, I am living proof that God uses people who don't read the Bible every day and don't have great long prayer times. Now, I'm not saying that I've turned my back on those things at all. Oh no, like I've told you, since I've been 14, I've been struggling to run after Jesus and to serve him. Struggling, but I'm a bit of a stumbler. And I blow it and I muddle it up so many times. And I've learned over the years that God just says to me, Steve, I know you're a stumbler. I know you fall over. I know you go, I'm one of those kind of guys. I sit down to pray, in the morning sometimes. And I say, Lord, today I'm going to pray for all my friends involved in mission. I pray for them. And then I'm thinking, does this happen to you? You think, what shall I say now? I really pray for them, Lord. They need you. Oh, they're great people. I pray for them. And then I'm sat there and I noticed that, I spilt something on my trousers. Yeah. What is that? Oh, dear. I wonder if I'll have to get them dry cleaned. Perhaps I should get these resold. And then you remember what you're supposed to be doing, don't you? Or perhaps you're one of those people who just goes to sleep. You wake up and start. You say, well, what was I praying? Oh, Lord, I pray for all those people, my friends involved in mission. I pray for them. Oh, time's getting on now. And I get so frustrated when I set out for my prayer life to be so deep and meaningful, and it ends up being so shallow, puddle deep, instead of lake deep. I struggle with those things. Now, I'm not saying to you, please don't mishear me, that you can say, well, Steve Chalke struggles with praying, so we give up too. I'm not saying that. There are two kinds of Christians, and only two kinds. There are the kind that's given up with the struggle to keep close to God and to pray and to spend time with him and to hear his voice. There's the kind that's given up with that struggle and the kind that continues with that struggle. And I'm one of those who wants to continue with the struggle and will continue with the struggle. And I fall over and the Lord picks me up and he takes me on. I got a son whose name is Daniel, and a few years ago, a couple of years back, he's a very fast runner for his age. And he's so fast, in fact, that he got put into our area-wide sports 2 years ahead of all the other lads who were in the area-wide sports. So he went for his school to run against boys who were all 2 years older than him, 800 metres, and because he was the fastest in his school. And he lines up to run against all these, we live in a place called Croydon, and he lines up to run against all these other Croydon boys, all 2 years older than him at that time. And the gun goes, and off they go. And Daniel, I was there, he gave it everything he had. He ran, and he ran, and he ran, and he ran, and he had some new trainers, and he was doing the business. And he came last. And we got in the car and we drove home, and he sat in silence, and we had tea, and he didn't speak, and he went up to his bedroom and he sat there and he wouldn't talk, and in the end he came down and said, I'm going to bed. And then he went to bed, And I went up to see him and I said, Daniel, you all right? He said, "Ugh." You know, that kind of Neanderthal speech. I said, you sure you're all right? He said, "Ugh." I said, you're not all right, are you? He said, "Ugh." And just went on like that. I said, what's wrong? He said, nothing. And it reached the point where I couldn't say anything else or even have another go at it, really. And I really prayed. And I said, Lord, please help me make some contact with him here. And I said it just once more. I said, Daniel, you obviously want to go to sleep, but I was just wondering. I know there's something wrong. What's troubling you? And he looked at me and he said, I'm rubbish. I said, what do you mean? He said, I was rubbish. I was rubbish. I came last. I'm rubbish. And I really didn't know what to say because I am a stupid father. Do you know? And I don't have that wisdom. That's the whole point. You see, I don't have all that, all that stuff everybody thinks I got. I haven't got. So I'm sat there and I'm wondering what to do. And I prayed like mad. And I said, Daniel, did you run as fast as you can? He said, yeah, I did. I said, oh. And I thought about it, just searching for words. A pause sounds dramatic, but it's normally the fact that you can't think of anything to say. And I said, well, that's all that matters to me, because if you gave it everything you got, your best shot, that's good enough for me. There was a long pause again. He looked up. He said, you really love me, Dad, don't you? I said, yeah, I do. And he thought about it, and he smiled at me. He said, that's all right then. And he went to bed, sleep. And the next day he was fine. But that's it, isn't it? He stumbles, he's lost, but does that matter to me? I'm his dad. I don't care whether he comes first or last or he falls over in the starting block. It doesn't matter. What matters to me is that he's given it his best shot because I'm his dad and I love him. And what matters to God is that you're giving it your best shot and you will fall over and you will stumble and you will blow it when you get home from spring harvest. However many songs we sing, you'll still blow it. That's it. And you need to know this, that God is with you at that point. Because he has filled you with his Spirit if you've cried out to him and you've asked for it. And he will use you just like he used that 75-year-old man. And if you're 75 here, I got good news for you. God called Abraham into action then. And he called Moses into action when he was 80. When God's got a big job, he gives it to someone with some track record. That's what happens. So I got to finish because time has gone. I simply want to say this. If you're frustrated with who you are, if you're frustrated and you long to be more for the Lord than you are, you're just like Abraham. And you're just like me, and you're just like every other Christian. And I don't pray for you that you won't be frustrated and you won't be dissatisfied. I pray for you more frustration and more dissatisfaction. Shall I tell you why? Because when you're frustrated and when you're dissatisfied, you will keep racing after your Lord. When you grow woolly and it's okay as it is, that's when you give up and you only run with half your hearts. So I pray on you frustration and I pray on you dissatisfaction, because when you're frustrated and when you're dissatisfied, something great is going to happen. I love frustration. Frustration is the same thing as faith. It's the same thing as vision. Abraham was frustrated because he didn't have a map and his wife was too old and he was pretty feeble himself and he had a big job to do. He was frustrated and dissatisfied, but it was that frustration and dissatisfaction, that vision that drove him. And without vision, if you have vision, you'll have frustration. It's the flip side of it. It is the same thing as vision. If you have no frustration, you have no vision. So I pray on you frustration, and I pray that you will move ahead. I pray for you. I pray for you, those of you who sit there and say, well, I'm not what I want to be. that you will cling to the Lord and understand that he's filled you with his Spirit and he moves you forward. For those of you who long to see things that you've not seen, and you've come to this spring harvest with the pain of it. A few years ago, I was trying to set up a hostel for homeless kids. And I came to Spring Harvest. It was, in fact, to Skegness. And I came to speak at a seminar, and I was so frustrated. It was a year when they showed a film about Lord Shaftesbury and all the great things he did for the poor. And I was so frustrated. I said, Lord, all I want to do is open this thing, and you won't supply the resources. They don't seem to be there. I was so frustrated I couldn't speak. And my friend Stuart Henderson, who was here, I went up to the front to speak, and I kind of stood there shaking, and he kind of wheeled me off to the side and sat me down. I was so frustrated. And I guess Abraham lived with frustration. Frustration about who he was, and frustration about what the plan was, and what the vision was. But he was a man filled with God's Spirit. And I guess, as well, Abraham looked over the years, and when it was going bad, and when there was a famine, he said, well, perhaps it's because I'm too old, and perhaps it's because I've failed, and perhaps because I'm not as useful as I could be. And perhaps he thought it's because I'm too scared of the future. And maybe any one of those is you. Your fear of the future, your fear about what faces you and what you're going back to. You feel that you've failed, you feel that you're too old, you feel that you're too stupid or too young or whatever. But I want to tell you that you are the kind of person that God uses, because that's written on every page of the Bible. Faith clings to God and it keeps running. Not the 100-meter sprint, but the marathon. Keeps on, keeping on, keeping on. Lord, fill me with your Spirit and let me run a race and persevere. The Lord bless you.